You grab my notes, and I promise to keep it brief. And my glasses. So they got really quiet.
It feels so far away.
Yeah, don't hesitate to move up. The only thing I'm going to ask, and it's where we're recording here, if you not talk, if you're right next to the, and also be careful not to bump the chair, okay? But other than that, you can join Miss Summers at her table, because I'm sure she feels ostracized right now.
No.
You're good?
Yeah.
Okay. But anyways, I'm Jim Dunning, coach of the Broad Run Debate and Speech team, and I welcome you to the latest installment of the Broad Run Debate and Speech team's Masterclass series. Thank you for taking time out of your schedules today. Hey, our past presenters have included, well, a number of famous people. And actually, if I can click properly, Pat Oswalt, stand-up comic and team alum. So he once sat in this, well, actually, I'm not sure if the library was here when he was here. So it might not have been, but he's been in the same classrooms that you've been, but we've been fortunate enough to have him come in and spend an afternoon coaching our speech team. We've also had in recent years Ilya Soman, who is a law professor at the Antonin Scalia School of Law, which is just up the street from us. And we also were fortunate during our COVID years to have Jay Brennan in, who is a Georgetown professor of actually a bunch of things, including, I think, economics, public policy, and but we had a really good discussion with him online a couple of years back. Actually, it might have been last year. I lose track because of the COVID years. But this is really cool because as a debate and speech team, we live in the world of what we call primary sources. And what's really cool about the people that we've had come in they are primary sources. I think in the world of philosophy, Jay Brennan from Georgetown is one of the most cited philosophers in the country. We had him in to talk about voting, which was the issue for LD, or the topic for LD at that point. So we were actually able to consult with someone who was going to be cited in many of our rounds. And of course, the same thing applies to Ilya Soman and Pat Oswalt. People have done his pieces. So anyways, primary sources are really important. And I have to say that the person we have in today, I'd almost describe as the mother of primary sources, just because of the wide-ranging books that he has published. His interest in his research are wide-ranging. We have books from him on, well, if we talk about debate, childcare. He has a book that, actually I've got some pictures here, that argue that you should have lots of children. So we could cite his books, or the statements that he's made in his books about when we've debated whether we should have universal childcare or not. Voting. One of my favorite books of his is The Myth of the Rational Voter. We also have Migration, a great graphic novel format called Open Borders, The Science and Ethics of Immigration. I think the most recent book is, How Evil Are Politicians is certainly a really good one too, and I think the title says it all. But one of the most recent books he has is Don't Be a Feminist, which I think is an essay written to his daughter, which the title is very intriguing and well worth exploring beyond the cover. But what we're here to talk about today is the case against education and why the education system is a waste of time and money. And so we have Bryan Caplan in, who is an economics professor at George Mason University, so just over in Fairfax County. And I know many of you are probably considering going there. So this is a New York Times bestseller, and has actually raised up quite a few hackles in the education world, but also some really important discussion about what we do, because it not only addresses higher education, but K through 12 education. So considering that we're in a public high school, I am worried that this book would burst into flames, and I'm actually hoping that Bryan doesn't burst into flames, but it hasn't happened yet?
No, not yet. So
Okay,
far, so good.
good. So, but the purpose of today, well, we do want you to actually challenge not only Bryan's observations about supporting public education with tax dollars, but also challenge yourself, because I think almost everyone here is probably on a higher education track. You're planning on college. And so we're not here to change your mind necessarily, but to make you more self-aware about the choices you're making. So we're hoping that the discussion today will foster that self-awareness and questioning not only again of Bryan's positions, but also your own positions on what you do here and what you do after you escape here, graduate from here. So our format today is discussion. It's not presentation. I'm going to have Sarisha moderate. She'll toss out some questions, but please jump in and with your own questions. So we encourage you to do that politely. We know that all of you have actually already submitted questions, which we're not going to do anything with. We wanted you to think about why you're here. So don't hesitate to bring up those questions today. So let's get started. Thank you, Professor Caplan, for joining us. Turning this over to Team Captain Sarisha to lead us and moderate the discussion. Our team motto is Sapere Ad, which means dare to ask, so please ask. Okay? Anyways, take it away.
Well, thanks for that introduction, and thank you, Dr. Caplan.
Thank you very much. Hello, debate and speech team. It is fantastic to be here.
All right. So, almost a decade ago, I see that you've written a little blog piece titled "What Every High School Junior Should Know About Going to College." And so in this room, I would say we mostly have sophomores through seniors. Sitting here, a couple of freshmen in the back. So I'm just going to kind of ask you some questions about the statements that you made in that article and kind of delve if you still agree with it,
Right, sounds
considering
good.
our current education plan. So in that article, something you said was, college is a good deal for good students, a mediocre deal for mediocre students, and a poor deal for poor students. What specifically do you mean by that, and do you still agree with that statement?
Yes, I do agree with that. What does it mean to be a good, mediocre, or poor student? Usual measures. Are you getting good grades? Are you doing well in your classes? Are you getting good test scores? Why do I say this? Well, here's the whole problem with college. Almost all the payoff comes from graduation. Right, so you're aware of this, right? If you do 3.9 years of college, what does that actually do for your career? Almost nothing. Right now, what that means is that you really want to know, am I the kind of person that is likely to actually successfully finish? You might say, well, doesn't almost everybody? And the answer is no. Anyone have any idea? So what would be the 4-year graduation rate for full-time college students on average in America? Any idea? So the odds that you finish your 4-year degree in 4 years, what do you think that is?
70%?
Lower.
50?
Lower.
30?
Yeah, 35% of full-time, not talking part-time students. Only 35% of full-time 4-year college students actually finish the degree in 4 years. Why don't they? Well, a lot of people just give up. They get bad grades, or they get frustrated, or they get bored, or they wander off. Another reason is a lot of people just mess up their requirements. They take the wrong classes, and then they think they're ready to graduate, and then it's like, oh, wait, you actually need a foreign language. Whoops, that's going to take another year. Another thing, people change majors. If you do 5-year graduation rate, then that goes up to 55%. So a slim majority manages to finish after 5 years for what is allegedly a 4-year degree. Now, why this matters is because while the overall percentage is a lot lower than most people think, it's highly predictable. People who are at the top of their class in high school would have a vastly higher 4-year graduation rate. They might even be able to finish in 3. Anyone here doing a lot of AP classes? Yeah, so it is possible that you could finish in 3 years, which is very rare, but it can be done by a motivated student. So basically, if you've got like an 80 or 90% graduation rate, or if we on-time graduation rate, that means that the odds that you are actually going to get that big payday over the finish line are much higher. If you're someone that's getting B's in high school, on the other hand, then you're probably down at about the average. And if you're not even doing that, then you are well below average, and your odds of finishing are just very slim. On top of that, of course, one thing that is very important for knowing what kind of a job you're going to get out of college is your major. You are probably have some idea. There are some high-earning majors. Can anyone tell me some high-earning majors? Majors where if you finish it, you will make a lot of money?
Engineering.
Yeah, engineering, yes. And electrical engineering, number one. Mechanical engineering, a little lower. What's another one that I bet most of you were thinking of? What's that? Yeah, CS. Finance. And actually one that many of you probably are not thinking about, but which is actually a fantastic deal, is economics, of which I'm a professor. Not just my opinion, this is the data. I always tell my students economics is the highest paid of all the easy majors. So it pays a bit less than engineering or CS, but for like 1/5 of the work. So that is something to keep in mind. If you've ever thought about doing econ, it is a great deal for people that are into that kind of thing. But anyway, again, people who are very good students tend to go into those harder majors, which are then higher paying. People that are weaker students in high school, if they do manage to finish, usually they're going to be doing an easier major like communications or psychology. There are jobs in those areas, but they just pay a lot less, and so you get a lot less out of it.
Well, I guess my next question is, so we're framing payoff as graduation, right? So how do you take into consideration things like the college experience, things being like the alumni networks that top colleges offer, internship programs? How do you take those things that are not necessarily the payoff of finishing college, but going through it?
Right. I'd say almost all of those things would have almost no payoff unless you finish. What good is it to make a bunch of friends in CS if you drop out? Your friends are going to say, okay, let's go and hire my friend to drop out. I guess it's possible, but it's just not very likely. Where I thought you were going with this question was, is it all just about the economic payoff of college? Is that the only reason to go? And the answer is no, that's not the only reason to go, but if college had no economic payoff, probably almost no one would go. It's a pile of money just to be in a country club. Right? And it's not even that fun of a country club. A lot of the time you're bored in class and just doing stuff you don't want to do. So now this is not just my opinion. There have been surveys of students asking them, why are you in college? And guess what? Financial payoff, career payoff are overwhelmingly the top answers. And this despite the fact that that answer doesn't sound very good. Right? You know, if you ask someone, gee, why are you in debate club? What is probably the most important real answer? You're doing it for your college application. But that isn't an answer that sounds good, right? If you are in an interview or something, and someone says, so why did you do debate? Do you want to say, oh, I'm just there, I don't really even like debate, I'm just there to go and get something on my resume? No, what are you going to tell them?
Do you enjoy talking?
Oh yeah, yes, you know, like I mean, I just love the exploration of ideas and talking, and discussion. You know, so the fact that people will admit that they're mainly in college to make money is very strong evidence that that's almost the only reason people are there. The only other one that's plausible is people are doing it because other people are doing it, just out of sheer conformity, embarrassment of doing and not doing what the normal thing is. But again, if the payoff went down a lot, if there were no economic payoff, that would probably be just a death spiral of conformity because, well, a lot of people will say I don't want to do it unless it pays. And then people say, well, gee, now it isn't even that weird to not do it, so maybe I won't do it. No, now hardly anyone's doing it. So there are other things going on in college, of course. Main thing to keep in mind is that a lot of the things that people like about college you can also like about your first job, and you probably will like about your first job after college, like getting to go and meet a lot of fun people. Guess what? You can do that on jobs too. So keep that in mind.
Well, next I would ask is it valid to measure poor, mediocre, great students just by grades, right? So in high achieving spaces, obviously cheating is very easy to do, just on a practical scale. I'm not sure if that level of cheating or just ability to get good grades in easy courses is as easy in college. So would you say that...
Probably easier, actually.
Really? But I would ask, like, is it fair for someone like first generation college student or a low income student who might have higher home responsibilities to be marked as a poor student, and thus should they not pursue higher education?
Right, so how many people here are taking any kind of statistics class? Is it offered here? You're doing AP Stats? All right. So when I make these claims, I'm not just expressing an opinion. I'm saying if we go to the numbers, what do the numbers tell us? Now, what the numbers do tell us is that your performance in high school is an excellent predictor of your performance in college. It's an excellent predictor of whether you're going to be able to hack it in a hard major, generally high-paying majors. Excellent predictor of whether you're going to actually finish. If you say that it's just not fair, that people aren't doing well in high school, and there's a lot of reasons, well, guess what? The unfairness persists throughout life. When someone comes to me and asks for advice, I try to find out what their actual situation in life is and then assist them given their situation. So when someone says, well, gee, let's see, what's some of like the most horrible problems? I've had students who have just had like very severe health problems where they can barely make it to class, and they say, well, do you think that I should still stick it out given my severe health problems? And I'll say, well, what's your prognosis? Right? And I say, no, it's really poor. Well, then maybe you should be doing something else. So I just try to be honest with people. You go and say, well, in a fair universe, no one will get sick. Yeah, but that's not what you're asking me. You're asking me for personal advice about how to run your life. And so I'm just going to be honest and tell you about it. You may have discovered that life is not fair. Are you familiar with this fact? Does it seem super fair to you so far? A lot of things going on in school is that people make a lot of effort to make school more fair than the rest of real life. And if you say, wow, it gets worse than this, yeah, it does get worse than this, of course. So you can either sit around and complain about how unfair life is, and I do that. I do that too. But in terms of, but what practically can I do? Then you just want to know what predicts what is likely to actually work for me, regardless of the fairness of the system.
So in the context of, let's say upward mobility, would you say that it wouldn't be more beneficial for someone like a low-income student to then go off and get a Pell Grant, which would pay for their college, and try to pursue STEM without any prior experience? Even if they're characterized by poor students, is there any hope of building a work ethic in college? Because on average, first-generation students have that capability with a college degree to move up in a financial bracket.
Right, there's always hope. It's just a question of whether it is a reasonable hope or just a Hail Mary pass. Right, so here's one that's very strong. If you did poorly in high school math, your odds of ever getting a STEM degree are near zero. So I think the state of California did a statewide math test. If I remember correctly, I think 0 people in the entire state for multiple years ever actually successfully got a bachelor's degree in STEM. Or you say, well, but I could be the first. All right, but what is statistically the likely thing to happen? So I would say that, particularly if you just did poorly in high school math, then the odds that you're going to ever successfully do a STEM degree are just so low. It would be irresponsible for someone to advise you to try it anyway. It would be like telling someone who has no experience in mountain climbing to try climbing Mount Everest. It's like, well, I could be the first. Yeah, but more likely you'll just die. So don't. I know there's a lot of propaganda in school about how anyone can do anything if they put their mind to it. You've heard this speech before? Right? There's not a lot of propaganda about discover your own limitations and then know what's realistic for you and then quit if you're pursuing a bad route. But that is actually often excellent advice. Right? Anyone here planning on being a professional athlete? Right. Well, probably because you have a realistic idea. Probably because you have a realistic idea. Well, aren't there any polymaths who do debate and football and volleyball and chess? Anyway, so there's so many kids who think they're going to be professional athletes, and guess what? Share of them are wrong. It's like 99%. Right. So now, if there's a kid who's close, maybe you say try harder. But there's a kid who's not even the best kid at his high school, and he thinks he's going to be a world champion. This is where the kind thing is to say, look, it's just not realistic. It's hopeless, really. It's so astronomically unlikely. You need to find something else that you like and are good at, because it's not going to be a career for you.
I'm going to turn it to the audience really quick. Is there anything that Professor Caplan said where you have any sort of counter argument, or you'd like to substantiate anything that he said so far? Because I do know that obviously this is very contrasting to anything we've ever heard, ever. And so...
Doesn't anyone tell you the truth in private?
In regards to higher responsibilities, maybe an experience with being a low-income student, do you guys have anything? And you guys can just say it.
Ask me anything. You cannot hurt my feelings.
So, what do you suggest, instead of higher education then?
So again, in terms of someone who's doing very poorly in school, and then step one would be, so is there anything that people do for pay that you like and are good at? That would be the first question. Right? If the answer is no, then it's like, all right, that's going to be harder. Honestly, if there's someone where their odds of succeeding in college are very low, I would just say, and they have no idea what else to do with their lives, I would say just get a job. Get a job and see what happens there. Probably you won't like that first job, then find another job. I also say, think about any personal connections you have. Do you have any relatives in any jobs that you think might be interesting for you, where they could get you an internship, where you could go and be an apprentice? So some of the main things that get overlooked are jobs and crafts. So, electrician, plumbing, construction. These are well-paid jobs that you do not, even now, you don't need any college for. A lot of people just say that that's beneath me, I would never consider doing it. So it's like, well, if you don't even like school, then that is a possible good route for you. There's, of course, plenty of others, but, honestly, when I'm giving someone advice, I try to talk to them and say, well, so what is it that you like and are good at? And if they say school, it's like, okay, well, I that's the standard path. But if it's not school, then it's a different story, and you really do need to look around more for other possibilities.
I would say that another thing that was in the article was kind of this idea of don't go to college if you don't know exactly what career to pursue, or like the rise of college graduates feeling like they don't know what to do in college, going in as an undecided major. Considering that most colleges' first year curriculum is kind of an exploratory period of kind of exploring new classes or even being classified, most of their classes, an undecided major, is this statement still valid? And isn't the first year of college kind of the place for people to figure out, go to the classes, meet professors on what they like to do?
So I don't actually remember putting it that way. That doesn't sound like me. For graduate school, that is where I always ask people, what job do you want to get? And then I tell them whether the graduate degree is the correct credential for that job. For undergraduate, you're right. It's true that a lot of people don't know what they want to do, but they are, again, as long as you were a good student in high school, being confused about what you want to do does not mean that it's not going to work out for you. Basically, there's just a lot of jobs where you can just get a college degree in something or other, and then you can get the job. That's not true for STEM or something like that. But there are if you just look at people who have jobs in business, a lot of those people don't have a degree in business. Of course, often they have degrees in STEM. That's what you'll see in finance, for example. So, anyone here want to work on Wall Street or finance? That's statistically really unusual. All right. I'm just going to predict a bunch of you will, right? But anyway, it's very common for Wall Street firms just to hire people with degrees in physics or math on the theory that if you can do well in those subjects, we think you can learn about stocks and bonds. But what I'd say is, the crucial thing is, did you do well in high school? In that case, you can safely show up and say, I don't really know what I want to do yet. Again, important to remember that most college majors actually are so remotely related to any job that you aren't really preparing for a job. What you're really doing is what I call signaling, which is actually the whole point of the book. It's a pretty simple idea. It just says that a lot of the reason why education pays isn't that you're going to use what you learned in school. It's that you get a stamp on your forehead. You're grade A worker, grade B worker, grade C worker, and so on. So if you go and get a degree in psychology, the odds that you'll ever actually work as a psychologist are really low because there's so few jobs for them, and basically you need to get a graduate degree to really get one of those jobs. But there's a lot of businesses that want people with college degrees in something or other, and a psych major can get that, or communications major or history major. These are going to be paying on average less than if you're doing STEM or economics. But again, if there's someone who's a good student and they didn't know what they want to do, then I would say, go and try the usual path. Just go there and try to take a bunch of different things. Although, I would also encourage them to go and look at some real numbers on what kinds of jobs you're likely to get with different degrees and how much money you're likely to make. But also, understand what are the math requirements, which, honestly, math requirements are the main barrier for most people in choosing a major because
are interested in pursuing, let's say, psychology with the intended career of being a psychologist, hearing kind of that thing of, such transferability between major and career, is there any thoughts that are going through your mind in terms of looking towards the future? So like personally for me, I can say that like I'm currently very interested in applied mathematics and kind of seeing how I can apply that to data science. And you know, hearing with what Professor Caplan just said, that does make me question, you know, where I'll actually end up if there's actually, you know, a place in data science for me, or you know.
Yeah, well, that's one of the most vocational majors you can possibly do. So you get a data science degree, you become a data scientist, and that there's the market's hot. So yeah.
Yeah.
But if you want to do history, it's a different matter.
Do you know where, you know, more so humanities-focused majors kind of end up in terms of jobs?
Yeah, like humanities majors end up all over the place. Of course, the most straightforward thing is to go and become a teacher and teach whatever you majored in. So you get a degree in history, you become a history teacher. That is a totally viable option. But in terms of other degrees, basically there's just a long list of jobs where you need a college degree in something or other. It doesn't really matter what. And if you have a college degree in something that isn't STEM, then those are the jobs that you're likely to get.
Is signaling a bad thing? Because the book talks about it a lot, right?
Yeah.
In like a bad way. So is it really such a bad thing as you're saying?
Well, here's the main issue with signaling. So again, like I said, getting stamps in your forehead. Is it a bad thing that we have some information about who is better and worse at different activities? By itself, that's great. Might you want to know who actually knows how to go and cut open a person's skull and remove a part of their brain? You don't want to just say, let's find out as we go. All right, that would be a bad idea. The real issue, though, with signaling is that there's what people sometimes call a rat race, or I just like the phrase of credential inflation. The problem with signaling is that if the main thing that you're doing in school is just getting stamps in your forehead, well, what happens if everybody gets an extra stamp? It doesn't mean everyone can get a really good job. It means that you need to get even more stamps in order to have your job application not thrown in the garbage. In the book, I go over a lot of the evidence on this. What we can see is that there are many jobs that now a college degree is required, that in the time of your parents or grandparents or great-grandparents, you could have done it right out of high school or even without the college degree. Right, so the idea of signaling is this. We usually think about education as being job training, but to a large degree, it is more like a passport to the real training that happens on the job. That's how it's possible that people became business managers after being high school dropouts 70 years ago, is because what you really need to do to run a business, it isn't mostly taught in school, it's something that you learn by doing. Right? And again, the problem with signaling is just that the more that we push signaling, the more education people need in order to do just as well as their parents or grandparents would have done with fewer credentials. So while at any point in time it does serve a useful function, it's something where if you really push it, then we can get into this dysfunctional system that we live in right now, where you've got to get a whole bunch of degrees just to get a job where really you could start now, honestly. Just to give you an idea of other countries. So in the UK, first of all, what do you need to do to be a doctor in the US? Anyone here want to be a doctor? All right. So what do you have to do?
You have to get a degree from college. Then
First you got to finish high school. Then you got to get a degree from college. Then
you have to go to med school for 4 years.
Yeah.
And then go to residency.
Yeah.
And then
and
if you
finally
want to specialize in fellow.
Yep. All right. So guess what? If you were in the UK, you get to go to med school right out of high school. Is anyone worried that if you went to a British doctor, that because they didn't study Shakespeare or do their gen ed in college, that they would not be able to operate on you properly? No. It's just this is just one example of credential inflation in the U.S. We've just piled on 4 extra years of your life. And think about it. It already takes long enough to become a doctor, and then you have to go and do 4 more years on top of that, fulfilling general ed requirements and everything else. It's a pretty crazy system. And the same goes for even professors, actually. Professors used to be able to become professors with a master's degree. All right, now you're just a lowly graduate student earning minimum wage or something like that while you're teaching in grad school. So that is really the heart of the problem, is the credential inflation, just adding on more and more years of school and just doing it and because other people are doing it. See, and the problem still seems to be getting worse. So you guys have heard of a postdoc. Heard of a postdoc? It's like after you get a PhD, but before you get a real job, you go and spend another couple years in this low-paid limbo state. And now there's actually something called a pre-doc. This is where in between undergraduate and graduate school, you spend a couple years making low money, getting ready just to apply to be in a doctoral program. So like the amount of years that students have to spend just to start real life has gotten up to a crazy high level. And I say that it is a problem of excessive accessibility of education.
Then how do we change that?
Yeah, great question. This is actually one of the easiest things to do. Well, so why do we have so much credential inflation? It's because college and other forms of education have gotten to be so accessible that if you want the share that try is really hard, or is really high rather. So something like 70% of high school grads in America start college. All right, now a lot of that is community college, so they're sort of inflating the numbers by including that, which has even lower graduation rates than 4-year. But again, the issue is that when you make education really accessible to people, then it also means that the share of the population that gets it's really high, and it means a lot less. So again, I can understand people being terrified by this idea and saying, wait, I would have to pay for my own college? Like, for real? Right, so, and the answer is yeah. Well, so if you really had to pay $200,000 to go to college, a lot fewer people would be going. Right, which means that employers could no longer be nearly so picky about what credentials you have to be worthy of getting an interview. So we see just one other, yeah. So the way that I often explain to my students is, without all the government support for education, a lot of you couldn't afford it. That's the bad news. Here's the good news. You wouldn't need it anymore. And then you could start your life 4 years earlier. Right? And anyone feel like being an adult and having money and a car and stuff 4 years earlier? Not being dependent on your parents for 4 more years? So I guess I saw some other questions. Let's see, I saw one in the back there.
I was wondering, who do you think would lose accessibility if you raise college prices?
Yeah, well, so there's two main groups. So one of them, of course, is people whose families are not as rich. It used to be that college was basically just a country club for rich kids. And it's like, oh man, that's terrible. Guess what? It also used to be that you didn't need college for any good job. Right? So in 1900, college really was just a country club for rich kids. And if you look at the successful people of the time, there are lots of successful people who just didn't go to college. Right? It just was not a barrier back then. So if you look at like CEOs, captains of industry, so even scientists in that period often were not actually college graduates. Definitely not if they're an industrial scientists, they were not. And again, the idea is, well, don't we need these extra years to teach all the stuff that we know? And I'll say, look, if you actually look at the curriculum, most of the time it's not spent on stuff that you really need to know in the modern period. Most of it is basically delaying you from learning the stuff that would actually be useful to you. So another important group that actually would be less likely to attend is people who are not motivated. There's a lot of people with rich families who only go because their family says, well, look, you have to go to college and we're going to go and push you through. If you actually were paying full price, full cost, even rich families might say, I don't think we really should send this kid who barely wants to get out of bed to college. Why don't we find a job for him to do? Maybe he'll mature and maybe he'll go later, or maybe he'll find that he actually wants to work. Oh, you already said, I guess you didn't get a chance yet?
So if you do raise the prices of college, is it really fair to the kids who are paying like $20K to get into college when at that point you wouldn't need to have a college degree to get a really good job?
I think it's actually I don't think I've ever heard that question in my whole life. I've been talking about this for 10 years. I've never heard anyone feel sorry for rich kids whose families pay full price. I think the answer is, well, look, this isn't going to happen overnight. It's not like it's just going to be without any warning, the whole world listens to me, right? I don't know, maybe, but I don't see any sign of that. So there's plenty of warning for people that are thinking about going to college and paying full price to see it coming and say, oh wait, maybe we don't want to actually do this. But anyway, so I suppose that it's possible that there could be some very, very clueless rich people who just aren't paying attention to what's happening in the world, and then it turns out their kid doesn't even need college for a good job anymore, and they accidentally spend $200,000. It's slightly sad, but it's it's the kind of thing where if that's your parents, just tell them, Mom, Dad, guess what? I can become a doctor now without being an undergraduate. there's a great new system where I just go straight to medical school and I skip this part.
I guess one question I had is kind of thinking about college scandals, like meritocracy, like rich parents who already have all the resources to provide their kids with a wonderful job, still paying off colleges to get a UCLA degree. What do you think about that? Are employers and people that of wealth not aware that you don't need college to get in? Like, why is that push for merit there?
Yeah, I mean, the big scandal. So you guys remember a few years ago, there were multiple scandals of famous rich parents getting caught. I think it was all about for admissions. I don't think it was for actual graduation.
Yeah.
But what can we say about that? Well, first of all, of course, there's a reason why it was on the news, is that it was a salacious story. That people are like, oh my God, I can't believe that would happen in this country, and now I want to watch every little detail about it. So in terms of that, the reason it was on the news is that it's actually not something that happens every day. It's an exciting story. As to whether that exactly is an important problem, I really doubt that it is. I think it's more that it's just, like most stuff on the news, it's statistically extremely rare, but it gets people's attention because it's a great story, right? It's like terrorism, right? The actual number of people killed by terrorism is really low as a percentage of all murder, but if stories about terrorism get people on the edge of their seats and they get people watching, so. But the more general idea of, are there a lot of rich families that just pour a lot of money into their kids trying to help them to get a better, get in, whether by having an SAT coach or hiring college counselors, that kind of thing. That does go on. In terms of the effectiveness, the answer is it's marginally effective. The reason why even these rich famous parents were actually paying bribes and trying to really cheat the system rather than just getting an SAT coach is because turned out those SAT coaches do not work magic. If the kid just isn't very bright, then the SAT coach isn't going to help very much. There's, as always, I think at the beginning I mentioned that life wasn't fair, so there's that kind of thing going on. Although, again, if you do get your kid into a school that he is not qualified for, you also have to worry about, is my kid going to be in that share of the kids that that flunk out? Honestly, when you're that rich and famous, I don't think you're really sending your kid to school to go and help your kid make more money. I think you're sending your kid to school so that you weren't embarrassed and you can sort of have some bragging rights for the other parents. Does it really matter if Tom Hanks' kid goes to college or not? What's going to happen? Just Gwyneth Paltrow's daughter just started at my son's college, so she's already a famous model. What precisely will Vanderbilt do for her? It's more, it's just sort of status. I don't want people to say that I'm just a model. I want to also be able to say I'm a Vanderbilt graduate. And also probably Gwyneth doesn't want to have to say, oh, well, my kid just isn't going to college. She's a model. She want to say, I'm a model and went to Vanderbilt. So,
and that actually applies to the Aunt Becky story.
Which story?
Aunt Becky from Full House, I think it is. She and her husband did the same thing with both their daughters getting into, was it Stanford, I think? Mm-hmm. And one of the daughters actually was already a famous YouTuber, pulling in tons of money. She actually needed a college degree to be successful in life. She already demonstrated that she was very good at business.
Yeah. Also, when you're that rich, there is the country club aspect of college. Which varies from college to college a lot, but if you're super rich, you might say $200,000 for some parties and fun, great deal. I spend that much money on my birthday party, right? There are some people who do. Is the show My Super Sweet 16 still on the air? No, it's just a show about extremely rich kids having extremely expensive 16th birthday parties. So I never watched it, but I watched the South Park parody.
Do you think college is valuable for building work ethic and as a buffer between adult life and high school?
Right, so high school is valuable for building work ethic. I've never worked as hard in my life as I did in high school. I was doing 2 or 3 hours of homework every night. It was 7.5 hours a day. College, on the other hand, most of those majors are really easy. There's been some really good research where they go and they find out how college students are spending every minute of their day. Back in the 60s, college was a full-time job where students back in the 60s would spend about 45 hours a week in attending classes and doing homework. That has plummeted in the last 50 years. So now the typical full-time college student is only spending about 25 hours a week on class plus homework. Now, if you're doing STEM, it's more. If you're in a better school, it's more. If you're a better student, you're putting in more time. But for the typical student who goes to college, essentially it looks like a 4 or 5 or 6 year party where whatever work ethic you build up in high school, you probably mess it up. And you have just like a long holiday. So if you're feeling like you're really stressed out during high school, who feels stressed out? Yeah, like you're overworked? All right, so yeah, about half of you. Anyway, for most people, college is a big break. Even in Japan, college is a big break. So Japan is famous for being a super high stress life for both kids and adults. And the college is sort of the one time between being a toddler and retirement where Japanese people can relax and have a party. Yes, please.
Wouldn't companies prefer like people who came out who have an undergraduate degree rather than people who came out like straight?
Yeah, I mean, of course, that's the whole idea of credential inflation, is that in a world where most of the good applicants have college degrees, you shoot yourself in the foot if you don't do it. So yeah, I mean, again, the part of my book is to say there's a big difference between the social value of education and the selfish value of education. The selfish value of education is very solid as long as you did well in high school. The social value is the main points that I question in the book, and that's where I say we have a lot of propaganda about how education is essential for having a modern economy and a decent society, and I say, look, that's not really the way that it goes. In fact, if we had a society where people just started their careers right after high school, we could have all the same good things that we have right now, plus people would get to be adults at an earlier age. If they want to, of course. You can keep living with your parents. Any of your parents going to kick you out? Any plans to kick you out? Say, look, if you just get a job, don't go to college. I don't want you around anymore. So you can still do that, but it would at least give you the opportunity to become an adult years earlier. I think it's pretty clear by the time you're 30, still living with your parents is pretty depressing, right? And yet, if you want to do an advanced degree, that is at least being financially dependent on your parents is a big part of your future, just for years and years. I mean, just to think that right now you might only be halfway through your period of dependence on your parents. It's going to go on for like another 15 years. Yeah, but that's not crazy. That's, especially if you're doing one of the long PhDs, like.
Like top 20 college, like would you say it's worth it? Because did you say it was like you are less likely to graduate from college?
Right. So community college, on the one hand, it's a clear gross waste of social resources because the completion rate for community college is ridiculously low. It's like 15-20% to finish a 2-year degree in 3 years. I mean, really, community college is mostly for students that didn't do well in high school, they don't want to, and they don't know what they want to do with their lives, and then no one goes and says, maybe try getting a job, and so they do community college. But it is still possible for a motivated student to get an incredible deal in community college. How? Well, you probably hear community college is a lot cheaper, right, than 4-year college. And if you are in the tiny minority of community college students who do well, you can easily transfer to a much more prestigious school. You can transfer to UVA. I know people have transferred to Harvard from community college. Right? And then, what does your diploma say when you do that? It says Harvard. And Harvard actually takes community college transfer students. They really do. So top schools do this. Probably part of, they have a philosophy of we really want to be inclusive and extend opportunity. And if you want to cash in on that, you totally can. You will have to put up with 2 years of your parents being embarrassed and your peers saying, gee, what went wrong? But who cares what they think, right? You're saving giant piles of money. And in fact, it is likely that you will be able to get into a better school by doing the 2 years of community college, being the best student in that community college, which probably wouldn't be that hard for you guys, and then transferring to top school. You save a pile of money. And I think you probably actually will get into a more prestigious school doing that route. I offer no guarantees. Remember how I said life isn't fair? See, I also offer no guarantees. I will give you statistical advice, which by the definition of statistical advice, often or sometimes doesn't work out. But yeah, so anyway, that is an alternate route. I mean, I would also say that your experience as being the best student in the community college is probably going to be kind of depressing, right? Because they're all commuter schools. Like the other students there will seem completely unmotivated to you. It will be sort of like going and taking classes with the students that didn't want to be in high school even. But if you can put all that aside and just say, who cares? I'm going to go and be the best physics student that they ever had at, let's see, what's the closest community college? Yeah, Nova. Yeah, well, yeah, but which Nova? Nova Loudon. So I'm just going to go be the best physics student Nova Loudon ever had. You get these letters from the faculty saying, this student is fantastic, right? By the way, so I also say that there is, if you go and take a look at colleges in America, all right, you will be stunned at how bad the average student is at a lot of schools. Like, I gave a talk at Angelo State University in San Angelo, Texas, and I think that their 75th percentile SAT score is 1100. All right, so maybe 1050. All right, so it was really low. And yet, there is no such thing as a college so bad where there aren't some fantastic professors there. You just have to work to find them. Why would that be? Because basically there are a lot of really smart people with PhDs who love their subject and they aren't able to get a better job. And they're so committed to the subject, they're willing to go and earn low pay just to go and be a professor somewhere. And then they are sort of lonely and depressed. They have no good students. And if you can be their one good student and introduce yourself to them, they will love you. Right? So, there are some sad professors. It's your duty to help them. You got to seek them out and say, hi, I love the subject. Right? And they'll be confused at first, but you'll convince them. Yeah, I think you were going to ask a question.
And after this question, I'm just going to quickly redirect, but go ahead.
Yeah, sure.
When you say how you were saying about the community college, if you do really well in community college, do you think that'd be more worth it than if you went to a school like MIT, Harvard, or Yale, and were a mediocre student who got C's and just kind of dragged through?
Let's see. So, would it be better to just get a community college degree and then transfer somewhere and transfer to where?
Yeah, to excel in community college.
And then what?
Or would it be worth it to just get the...
So here's the thing, almost all the payoff for community college comes from transferring. If you're a nurse, or there's a couple of other very special associate's degrees that do pay well, but if all you do is are the best community college student ever and then give up and quit, then it doesn't pay much. The way that you were able to get a huge value out of community college is by doing 2 years there, be the best student they ever had, and then try transferring to MIT. So being a C student at MIT, but who finishes versus the best community college student ever, then MIT is still a lot better for you.
Well, quickly, I want to redirect to this population because I feel like when talking about, these tiers of good student, mediocre student, poor student, we've correlated it a lot with wealth, right? So a good student being generally of a
Right.
higher
Yeah, by definition, it's based upon grades and test scores.
Right.
Yes, but there is a correlation, sure.
So I want to talk about, the good students that come from a low-income background. If your proposal is that we kind of diminish the tax funds, how do we ensure that those good students still have an access to an affordable college, a top college, without those sort of Pell Grants and other financial aids?
Well, if they're good enough for a top college, here's good news. Those colleges are totally loaded. They're sitting on countless billions, and they are desperate to give it to you. Right? So this is one of the biggest misconceptions that students still kind of have about top schools, which is that if you were a poor student, you can't go to Harvard. Not only is that false, if you are even from just a merely upper middle class home, Harvard will basically pay you to go there. Right? So that is fact. Like, so this is one of the main misconceptions. The top schools are so well funded. They are like Harvard is worth $50 billion. Right? They don't know what to do with the money, but one of the things they do is if there ever is a student that seems like they could do well at Harvard, but who doesn't have the money, they just give them the money. The real people that actually, where government money makes a difference for them are basically students who were mediocre or poor, who would not be getting this kind of help from top schools. Again, for them to say, how can we ensure that they too go to school? Say, look, we can't and we shouldn't. This is the sickness of our society, that we're trying to ensure that as many people as possible go to school. This is why you have to go and be financially dependent on your parents for so many years. It's why it's so important to get a degree in psychology to get a job in a bank. It's because in a world where these degrees are so abundant, when an employer is looking at a stack of applications, it's easy for them to just throw away the people without those college degrees. There are fancy restaurants now where the waiters need college degrees. Right? It is a crazy system. It did not exist in 1945. In 1945, only about 25% of American adults had finished high school. If you're running a business in 1945, you can't just say, I only take college grads. I have a nice restaurant. Right? That just would have meant that you had no applicants. So, again, this is the important thing to understand, is that for one individual, that degree is essential. But for our society, on the other hand, by making the degrees essential, you also make them less and less valuable. So, I mean, here's a way of thinking about it. Would you rather be a high school dropout today or 1945? 1945, you'd be in the same boat as 75% of the adults. It didn't look very bad to be a high school dropout back in those days, and so you still have a lot of opportunities to work your way up in the world. Now we have a system where if you're a high school dropout, you're basically relegated only to bad jobs, because people say, why should I even give a chance to a high school dropout?
Well, moving away from kind of college and talking about jobs, would you say that signaling extends to, K through 12 education? And if so, how should we navigate that then? Is there a value in terms of, literacy, numeric schools that we learn in K through 12?
Yep. Yeah, so I've done a ton of debates on this book, and in basically every debate someone says, well, since Bryan believes that education is all signaling, and I've said I don't believe that 50 times in the book, and I've said it 5 times in my opening statement. How many times do I have to say it before you believe me? So look, there's multiple things going on in school. I think the main thing going on is signaling, but there's also other things. You're also learning literacy, you're also learning numeracy, so it is a bundle of multiple things. So that's the first thing to understand. Now, in terms of signaling, I'd say high school is where it's very clear, because there is actually a difference in performance. Basically 100% of Americans finish 8th grade now, so that no longer distinguishes you. Right? So if everybody does something, then it no longer goes and distinguishes one person from another. But for high school, on the other hand, it does matter. A lot of the signaling is actually an input into later signaling. You need to go and do well in high school in order to get into a good college. You need to do well in middle school in order to get into the honors classes or to get into special school for high school. I mean, even now, you need to do well in elementary school in order to get into the honors middle school. Right? Or you need to get into a fancy preschool to get into the fancy kindergarten, which in New York is actually a real thing now. There's signaling going on all the time. I mean, honestly, the stuff I'm talking about, this is basically the big idea that I had at the earliest age of all of my ideas. So I will say I was in kindergarten. I was 5 years old, and I just said, I'm confused. Why do I have to learn this stuff? I mean, I really was just baffled. Why am I expected to do the stuff? Why do I have to do the finger painting? Why do I have to do this stuff? And the adults would just say, well, if you want to get a good job, you have to do it. And I'd say, all right, that seems true, because the adults I know with good jobs did well in school, but why? And then I was just confused for many years. But it's all right, so somehow I work hard in school and do well, and then my future is bright. Yeah, but eventually, by the time I was an early teenager, I did start to have some vague idea of, well, you're trying to get a stamp on your forehead, and these stamps are sequential. You need to get the good stamp in junior high to get the good stamps in high school. You need the good stamps in high school to get the good stamps in college. Good stamps in college to get the good stamps in graduate school. So that was when but it was only when I was in college that I realized there's a whole economic theory of this, and some Nobel Prize winners had already worked out the details. And okay, great. I'm wondering, what does my book add? What my book adds is actual evidence, right? Because the people that got Nobel Prize winners got it for pure theory. They got it for just doing some math and saying, I've worked out in great, gory mathematical detail how this is possible. I wrote this book to say, let's look at the world and see if the theory is really true. And that's where I say, yeah, there's a lot of evidence for it.
Well, one thing is, you do teach at GMU, George Mason, which is, on your position with taxpayer-funded schools.
Yep.
How is your position, would that align with your teaching position?
Right. Well, so like most people, the main thing that I decide when I take a job is whether it's a good job for me. Right. So I don't take a job because it's going to change society one way or the other. I can have illusions that I can go and write great books that are going to go and transform our society, but that's basically totally implausible. Right? What are the odds? If I had to go and bet on the world listening to me, like 1 in a million, 1 in 10 million, right? It's just really low. Like you can go and write books that are successful. It doesn't mean that the world will listen to you, right? Just look at the books in this library. How many authors actually had anyone really listen to them? They got a book published. So yeah, like being a professor is a fantastic job. I mean, I'll just say it is a ridiculously good job. I mean, I tried getting this job because I knew it was good. Only after I had it did I say, wow, it's even better than I ever imagined a job possibly could be. So just to be clear, what is the main thing that professors do? Do you know? See, that's what people think. That's what my parents think. I've told them 100 times that's not. Like the number of hours I teach per year is 150. I teach 150 hours per year. Just in your head. So, Bryan, how many? A typical work week's 40 hours. A full-time job is 50 hours. Is 50 weeks. So, what's 40 times 50 again? You can do this in your head, right? 40 times 50. 2,000. 2,000. What's 150 divided by 2,000? 7.5%. So my teaching is 7.5% of a full-time job. All right. What about grading and stuff? I've got a grad student who does my grading for me. I just grade the exams. It's a few additional hours per year. So what is it that professors are supposed to be doing then? Starts with an R. Research. All right. And what is research? Turns out research is working on whatever you feel like working on or nothing at all. That's research. Now, there is one catch, which is that when you are first hired to be a professor, for one of the good jobs. The good jobs are called tenure-track jobs. Right? What this means is basically there's a 6-year period where you're on probation, where you have to go and write enough stuff that impresses the other professors in your department. So basically you have 6 years to convince the other professors that you're awesome and that you're a brilliant person who writes great stuff. All right, and during that time you need to worry a lot about, well, where's it getting published and do other people take it seriously? But then there is a vote where they either give you a dream job for life or they fire you. And as long as they vote to give you that dream job for life, then you are on easy street for the rest of your entire career. And from then on, research is whatever you feel like doing or nothing. And are there really professors who just get tenure and then stop publishing and they teach 150 hours a year and they get their salary for the rest of their lives? And by the way, there's no mandatory retirement for professors either. You can go to your 90 if you want. And the answer is yeah, there are people. I know people like that. All right, so I keep writing because I want to write and I have a lot of stuff that I want to say. Although, even then, after getting tenure, it's what projects do I think are interesting? I wrote a graphic novel. It's not normal for professors to write graphic novels. It is about economics. It's a graphic novel about called Open Borders: The Science and Ethics of Immigration. It teaches readers about a lot of academic research. But still, this is not something that almost any department in the country would approve of a professor doing on company time. But guess what? I did it anyway because I wanted to do it.